A verse I picked out this week is from Genesis chapter 31, verse 42. It says, God has seen my affliction and the labor of my hands. And we'll come across that today, but I thought that was a good verse because it's true. It's true with all of us that God sees He sees our difficulties and He sees what we do, and if we will trust in Him and in the covenant promises He's made to us, for us, He helps us, and we'll be okay. So let's stand and let's worship today with that thought that we're not worshiping a God who doesn't see. We're worshiping a God that does see. We're worshiping a God who receives our worship. You can come on up. And if we'll all stand with Matt.
Good morning.
Morning.
Turn and greet somebody.
Morning. Morning.
We just take a few minutes just to clear our minds. You know, I for one, I get excited about coming and worshiping with all of you people, and I get worked up, and just need to focus on God. I need to calm down right now. I had such a good time in Sunday school, and I'm kind of like, maybe it was the coffee that did it to me, but I just, I don't know. I just want us to worship and not think about anything else but worshiping God. I mean, our hearts, our minds should be on Him, lifting Him up. And sometimes it's hard for us to do that because we're so, yeah. We have to make sure we hit the right notes, we're singing the right words, and I don't sing the right words, and I don't hit the right notes sometimes. But I heard that. I heard that. But, it's sometimes we just put too much work into it, and we need to just relax. And
Somebody look up Matthew 18, 1 through 5. I was listening to the radio on the way.
No, that's fine.
And I won't say her name because I'd probably screw it up anyway, but she was talking about the biblical aspect of children, how the Bible views children. And this portion of Scripture came to my mind. And I think that's how we need to approach Him today. Yep.
At that time the disciples came to Jesus saying, "Who then is greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" And Jesus called a little child to him and set him in the midst of them and said, "Assuredly I say to you, unless you are converted and become as little children, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore whoever humbles himself as a little child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Whoever receives one little child like this in my name receives me."
See, they weren't running up to Him going, "Heal me," or trying to get something out of Jesus. They were just bringing themselves. Isn't that awesome? That's how we need to approach Him today.
I pray we have the feistiness and heart for God like that, Miss Clara.
Yeah.
She's an actress, but I don't think that she's truly acting. I think she's really showing us what we should do.
I appreciated Josh this morning. I was telling Josh, how I was feeling, and he said, "Hey, let's just get together and pray." And appreciated that. I think all of us appreciated that. And, that's one thing that I don't know Josh that well, but I can see a big change in that man's life. That's pretty cool. I think it's pretty awesome. And there again, I don't want him to have pride, stay humble. But, yeah, but it's awesome when you see growth in people. that you're in church with. So thanks, Josh.
When you found me, I was so blind. My sins were before me, I was swallowed by pride. But out of the darkness, you brought me to your light. You showed me new mercy and opened up my eyes. From the day you saved my soul, till the very moment when I go home, I'll sing, I'll dance, my heart will overflow. From the day you saved my soul. Where brilliant light is all around, and endless joy is the only sound. Oh, rest my heart forever now. Oh, in your arms I'll always be found. From the day you saved my soul, till the very moment when I go home, I'll sing, I'll dance, my heart will overflow. On the day you saved my soul. My love is yours, my heart is yours, my life is yours forever. My heart is yours, my heart is yours, my life is yours forever. From the day you saved my soul, till the very moment when I come home, I'll sing, I'll dance, my heart will overflow. From the day you saved my soul, from the day you saved my soul, till the very moment when I come home, I'll sing, I'll dance, my heart will overflow. From the day you saved my soul. Make me broken so I can be healed. 'Cause I'm so calloused and now I can't feel. I wanna run to you with heart wide open. Make me broken. Make me empty so I can be filled. 'Cause I'm still holding onto my will, and I'm completed when you are with me. Make me empty till you are desire, till you are, till you are. Make me lonely so I can be yours, till I want no one more than you, Lord. 'Cause in the darkness, I know you will hold me, make me lonely till you are, till you are, till you are. Till you are, till you are, till you are. Lord, please keep making. I know you'll keep making. Lord, please keep making me. I've heard 1,000 stories of what they think you're like, but I've heard the tender whisper of love in the dead of night, and you tell me that you're pleased and that I'm never alone. You're a good, good father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are. And I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. Oh, and I've seen many searching for answers far and wide, but I know we're all searching for answers. You can provide, 'cause you know just what we need before we say a word. You're a good, good father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are. And I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways to us. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways to us. It's love so undeniable. I can hardly speak. Peace so unexplainable. I can hardly think as you call me. Deeper still as you call me. Deeper still as you call me. Deeper still into love. Love, you're a good, good father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are. And I'm loved by you. It's who Father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are, and I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. You're a good, good Father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are, and I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. You're a good, good Father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are. Loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am.
I had a dream this week that really helped me, and I was happy that the Lord gave it to me because I feel like it's kind of a constant struggle to stay on path. And I had a dream that I was walking across a bridge, it was on the ground, but it was wooden, and I was with my dad, and it was some kind of festival. And when we got to the other side, there's all these people. And him and I started walking, and everybody was coming against us, and him and I got separated, and we were farther than this apart. And I instantly knew I've got to get back to him, because if I don't get back to him, I'm going to get lost, and he's going to get lost in this crowd. We're going to get separated. And so I went over, and I hooked my arm through my dad's arm and held on to him, and it was just, I just had this peace and this contentment. And when I woke up, it's one of the rare ones that I instantly know. But I just knew that God was saying in life, everybody as a believer, everybody's going to be going the opposite way of us, or should be. And as soon as we get out into the world, if we stray from him, it's hard to get back. And how important it is to not let that gap get there, because you know how it is. As soon as you don't take the time to read your Bible, or you haven't been praying, or you're not in the Word, or you miss church for a little while, next thing you know, you're like, where's God? And he's there. We're the ones that strayed and allowed that space to be there. But, when I hooked my arm in his arm, and even though everybody was coming against us, if that happened in real life, I'd be like, oh, we're going the wrong way. We probably should, get off to the side or whatever. It wasn't like that. I knew we were doing the right thing, and I knew that it was okay, and I just had this peace and this joy, and nobody was hitting us. We just walked against all the traffic. So it encouraged me, because it's easy to get off track and get caught up in everything around us, and get caught up in what are we buying, what are we doing, where are we going, And so I hope that encourages us just to stay focused when you start feeling that little division, to just run back to him before it gets too far.
I think so many times that maybe we feel that our coming to church, we're scripted, and some churches have bulletins, long bulletins, and there's all different kinds of things that you do and say. I just want us not to feel like we're scripted here. I know that for me sometimes I get that away. So I just, if somebody this morning has a need right now, has God placed something on your heart that you need to tell the congregation? Because that's what we're here for. We're here to lift each other up. If you have something on your heart that God's put there, and it's for the benefit of us, then by all means, don't be afraid. If God's put it on your heart, then speak out. If somebody needs prayer right now, if somebody wants to be healed, if something, we don't have to go by a script. We just don't have to. That's not God. God's not in a box. The Holy Spirit's not in a box. And we don't unlock the box and he comes out. He's here. So, gosh, if God's put something on your heart, then by all means, don't just sit there. Speak out. Come thou fount of every blessing, tune my heart to sing thy praise. Streams of mercy never ceasing, calls for songs of loudest praise. Teach me some melodious song, sung by flaming tongues above. Praise the mount I'm fixed upon, it, mount of thy redeeming. And I was lost in utter darkness till you came and rescued me. I was bound by all my sin when your love came and set me free. Now my soul can sing a new song. Now my heart has found a home. Now my soul is always with me, and I'll never be alone. Oh, come thou fount, come thou King, come thou precious Prince of Peace. Near your bride to you is sing. Come thou fount of our blessing. Come thou fount, come thou King, come thou precious Prince of Peace. Near your bride to you is sing. Come thou fount of our blessing. Know to grace how great a debtor daily I am constrained to be, and let thy goodness like a fetter bind my wandering heart to thee. Prone to wander, Lord, I feel it, prone to leave the God I love. Here's my heart, Lord, take and seal it for thy courts above. Come thou King, I was lost in utter darkness till you came and rescued me. And I was bound by all my sin when your love came and set me free. Now my soul can sing a new song. Now my heart has found a home. Now your grace is always with me, and I'll never be alone.
We'll be in Genesis chapter 30 and 31 today. As we continue our, I don't know if you're enjoying this study we're doing in Genesis, but I'm telling you what, I'm really enjoying it. By the way, welcome to Pastor Alex and those of you who are studying abroad. I neglect to mention you every week, but you're certainly a part of this congregation, and we don't neglect you. Your study is important too. Last week when we were in chapter 29 of Genesis, we looked at Jacob. He'd acquired two wives in Leah and Rachel, and he'd also acquired their handmaids. As we read, we saw that Jacob favored Rachel more than he did Leah, and yet we found out that she was barren. And as we come to chapter 30, by the time we get to chapter 30, Leah has produced for Jacob 4 children, 4 male children, 4 sons. So we'll open there in Genesis chapter 30. It says, and when Rachel saw that she bare Jacob no children, Rachel envied her sister. You remember Leah's her sister, and said to Jacob, give me children or else I'll die. And Jacob's anger was kindled against Rachel, and he said, am I in God's stead, who has withheld thee from the fruit of the womb? In other words, he's saying, you're blaming me, that God has withheld children from you? And she said, behold, my maid Bilhah, go in unto her, and she shall bear upon my knees, that I may also have children by her. And she gave him Bilhah her handmaid to wife, and Jacob went in unto her, and Bilhah conceived and bare Jacob a son. Now, this is a place that I think we need to pause for understanding, and we come to one of these places where I'm going to give you information that I would encourage you to look, and I'll be surprised if you find this in any other commentary, because I can't find it, but I think it's relevant and worth looking at. And the reason you can't find it is because, as you know, as you've been here, what I teach is what I learn, and it's a little different than traditional teaching. You know, I haven't taught you to bit into a silly apple, and from there I teach you what the Bible has for us. And the basis of which is through Genesis so far, I keep bringing the point of the purity of the bloodline of humanity that Jesus Christ would come through, the necessity of God keeping the bloodline pure. This bloodline that we saw him preserve through Noah, then through his son Shem, and it's now extended through Abraham, and now through Isaac, and we see it in Jacob. And then we come to this chapter here, and if we don't have our eyes open, it can be problematic. So I want to work on it a little bit this morning, because here we have Jacob's wives giving unto him these 2 handmaidens are producing children. You know, he's going to have, by the time we get out of today's lesson, he's going to have 12 sons. I'm sorry, he's going to have 11 sons by the time we leave today's chapter. In total, he's going to end up with 12 sons, but 11 sons and a daughter produced by Rachel and Leah, who we understand. But then we have this Bilhah and then Zilpah. And their offspring are going to become the 12 tribes of Israel. And boy, if we don't do some work here, you say, Pastor Rod, you're absolutely all wet because you just lost it there. I was with you right up until then. So I want to look at this. Because I know if you look back at what we've been studying, if you look back on the experiences of Abraham and Sarah, they did the same thing with Hagar. And if you remember the result of that with Ishmael, and I told you Ishmael was driven away from the home by Abraham, and I told you the reason was because he was of mixed blood. That he couldn't stay in the same area because it would threaten the bloodline. So then this chapter then could seem pretty problematic. You say, well, I don't get this. So I want to take some time and work on it. So let's look backwards a little bit so we can get this. Where did these two handmaids belonging to Leah and Rachel, this Bilhah and Zilpah, come from? Well, it's not been too long since we've been there. We know they were given as wedding gifts from their father Laban. And I want you to go, if you got your Bible, go back to Genesis chapter 29. And I want to look at verses 24 and 29. Genesis chapter 29, verses 24 and 29, because you need to see them. Genesis 29, verse 24 says, And Laban gave unto his daughter Leah Zilpah his maid for an handmaid. And verse 29 says, And Laban gave to Rachel his daughter Bilhah his handmaid to be her maid. Now there's something different about those two statements. I want you to see it. What's different? Well, if you look, Zilpah was Laban's maid. Bilhah was his handmaid. So see the difference. There's a slight difference there. I want you to see it, and we'll come back to that. So we know from our studies that Jacob had gone to his mother's people in Padanaram to find a wife. He sat there to find a wife. And this is where he was now living. This is there he's living. This is where these children are being born. Well, we're clearly told this is Rebekah's people. This is her brother. This is of Abraham's lineage, the son of Shem. They're living in Padanaram in Haran. Genesis 27:43 says, Now therefore, my son, obey my voice. Arise. This is Rebekah talking to Jacob. Arise, flee thou to Laban, my brother, in Haran. So we know where this is at. So Jacob married. He had 11 daughters and a son while he was in Haran. And we followed it. We know that Leah and Rachel, Laban's daughters, were descended from Noah's son Shem, of this pure bloodline. But again, how about Zilpah and Bilhah? Where'd they come from? Well, let's keep working on it. Donna, if you'll go to that file I opened, you'll have a chart that we'll use. Right there. And you might need to dim the lights on this half of the room. Yeah, no, go down a couple files. Let's look at something else. Another one. All right, let's stop right there. So this is the journey of Abraham, is the red line. We can see he started out, he was of Ur of the Chaldees, remember that. And this happens to be real near where the Tower of Babel was. And so this is the Arabian Desert, so you don't walk through it. You see, you went up around, there's Babylon, there's Assyria. Here's Haran right here. And this right here is Padanaram. This whole area is Padanaram. It's Haran. We've been seeing those terms. So when Abraham and his Terah and his family first left Ur of the Chaldees, they stopped in this area, Haran. Eventually, when Abraham was called out, he travels on down here to, there's Shechem, there's Hebron, and all these places on into Egypt and back. So I want you to know that, and I think it's useful sometimes to see these areas. So what do we know about Haran? Well, we know this is where they went. What do we know about the people of Haran? Well, Haran was originally not a town. Where we're reading, Haran's not a town. It's a sub-area in the Padanaram area. Go back up to the first slide, if you will, Donna. Here's the genealogy. You know, Noah and Japheth and Ham and Shem, and we're following this line of Shem, and we've seen all these. There's Peleg, when the nations were separated at about the time of the Tower of Babel. There's Eber, who the name Hebrew comes from. And we've gotten clear down here to Terah, and he's got 3 sons, Haran and Nahor and Abram. Well, Abraham was born, if you do the genealogy, he was born only 300 years after the flood. Abraham lived only 300 years after the time when there were only 8 people on the earth. He was born only 150 years after the families of Noah, Ham, Shem, and Japheth, and their families were dispersed from the Tower of Babel. So the entirety of Genesis chapter 11, and I'm going to work on Genesis chapter 11 just a little bit. The entirety of Genesis chapter 11, if you look at that chapter, it takes us from the Tower of Babel and the descendants of Shem is traced to Abraham over a span of 150 years. It takes us that path. As I told you, we find some interesting names in there. Eber, which I pointed out earlier. So what I want you to see is, I'm fumbling a little bit here, is that for 150 years from the Tower of Babel, from the dispersion of the people, for 150 years the family of Shem was inbreeding and growing. Inbreeding, and that's not a comfortable word for us. Things are different. You know, you think about Shem and his wife leaving the ark, there's 2, and then they have a male child and a female child, and by necessity, and we saw this with Lot and his daughters, there's inbreeding, brothers and sisters, and we've seen that with Abraham's brother Nahor, that he married his niece. So these are isolated people. So this is the only way these populations grow, and they're different than we are used to, but it's the way it happened. These were nomads. Each one of these families were nomadic. Their group was just all they knew. They didn't have access to other people. So by necessity, the rules of reproducing were different than ours. So I want you to see that God needed to keep the line of Shem pure. So I want to go back to where I'm speaking in Genesis chapter 11, verses 1 through 8. And I want you to see something different. You've been talking about the Tower of Babel a lot, and as you read it, a simple reading says, well, these people were being disobedient, and everyone teaches that God just confused the languages and dispersed the people because they were trying to get to heaven on their own power. How many times have you heard that? Genesis 11:4 says, and they said, go to, let us build us a city and a tower whose top may reach unto the heaven, and let us make us a name, one name. Let us be a people. Now remember, these are the descendants of Noah. These are these 3 families. Only people that can be. Let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. Moving on to verse 8. So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city. So what I want you to see is that the scattering of the people, the confusing of the language, so they could no longer cooperate, and the scattering of the people was not because of the tower they were building. God had to destroy their ability to speak family to family. You know, I've read about the Tower of Babel all my life, and I thought, there must have been lots of people in hundreds of languages. I think there became 3 languages. That each family had a language. That God had to break their ability to communicate and cooperate because of what is said at the end of verse 4 in chapter 11, let us build a city so we can all stay together unless we be scattered abroad. God wanted them scattered and isolated from one another. Otherwise, they were going to all stay together, the pure bloodlines and the impure bloodlines, and soon they were going to completely 100% pollute the bloodline. Let us build us a city where we can stay together, they said. And God, his response was to disperse them. And so interesting, if you look back at chapter 11, you should go back and look at chapter 11 this week, that the narrative of chapter 11 goes directly from that to these are the generations of Shem. You think those two things are unconnected? I don't think they're disconnected. I think it's amazing how clear everything becomes when we actually read what we're seeing. When we begin to actually discard the foolish things that we've been taught, that somehow God was threatened by man's attempts to reach heaven on his own by building a tower. You don't have to drive too many hours away from this place where we're at today to see skyscrapers in big cities that extend far above what the Tower of Babel would have been. If height was the problem, these buildings wouldn't exist. If man's attempt to get high into the sky was a problem, our airlines wouldn't fly hundreds of miles above us. God wasn't threatened by the Tower of Babel and what was going on there. You were threatened by it. I was threatened by it. Because if those families were allowed to stay together and pollute the pure human bloodline that God was shepherding through time, Jesus Christ would have been prevented. And we were only a doomed people. And then it's there late in chapter 11 that you can read of Haran's death. 11:28 says, and Haran died before his father Terah in the land of his nativity in Ur of the Chaldees. So Don, if you'll go back to that map for me, that they were still back here when Terah's son Haran died, before they left, before they went up here. So Terah named that area after his deceased son. We can understand that. Sound like something we would do. That after the death of Terah's son Haran, he and his other two sons, Abraham and Nahor, moved to Pandanaram, to a new place which he named after his deceased son, Haran. Same name. Genesis 11:31 says, Terah took Abraham his son, and Lot the son of Haran, his son's son, and Sarai his daughter-in-law, and Abraham's wife, and they went forth with them from Ur of the Chaldees to go into the land of Canaan, and they came to Haran and dwelt there. And the days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. And why am I telling you all this? Well, I'm telling you all this so that you can see that there wasn't just 5 or 6 people that made that trip. These were nomadic people. Making that trip with Terah and his sons and daughters-in-law will have also been numerous less wealthy Shemites. Those relatives who were working for them, those who were tending the flocks. This would have been a large group of people moving, all of them of the pure bloodline. Well, we know in the next chapter, in Genesis chapter 12, God sent Abraham away even from the rest of the descendants of Shem, and he began the rest of his journey down to the promised land that we now know as Israel. So what's all this meaning about these two a maid and a handmaid, Zilpah and Bilhah? Let's go back and look at these two mothers of some of Jacob's children. And more specifically, how was it that Hagar, the handmaid of Sarah, producing a son for Abraham and Ishmael was a problem, but these two servants producing sons for Jacob are not a problem? Well, it's all in the detail. Scripture clearly tells us that Abraham and Sarah picked up Hagar when they were in Egypt because of the famine. Remember that? She's even called the Egyptian. She was of Egyptian blood. She was not a descendant of Shem. Again, the family of Abraham were nomads. Now bring it back again, that we already read about Abraham's brother Nahor marrying his niece, the daughter of Haran, the sister of Lot. They had a son named Bethuel. Will you bring me, Donna, I'm going to keep you busy. Bring me that first slide again. Go to the second slide, it's easier. So here's Terah and Haran, Nahor, Abraham. And Nahor married Milcah, the sister of Lot. And they produced Bethuel, who produced Laban and Rachel. You see how direct that line is? That they're all Shemites. So they're nomadic. You can turn the lights back on now. So they're nomadic. They marry, they produce children in the way that we are accustomed to, husbands and wives. But children were so important to them for wealth that they had to have more hands to work to produce agricultural production. So their way was different than ours also. They took concubines of nieces and cousins, less wealthy people of the family. The women who would live in the home, these concubines, the women who would live in the home but at a lower status of the wife, and the men would produce children with them. The concubines and the female children that they produced to earn their keep, they worked in the home under the direction of the wife. This is just a way, it's different than ours. Now, I'm coming a long way around to try to get you to see that female concubine, you think of her as a servant in the house, a relative, a less wealthy relative. You can look at her as a child-producing subordinate wife, if that helps you. That she was known as a handmaid. That's what a handmaid was. While a female in the house that was a daughter of the man in one of his concubines was called a maid. Remember what those two verses I showed you? That one was Laban's handmaid, one was his maid. One was a subordinate wife, one was a daughter of him and a subordinate wife. So we can start to understand these two terms. So let me say it again. A concubine, a secondary, a subordinate wife was a handmaid, a daughter of a concubine, a man of the house, and a maid. All of them in Laban's household, descendants of Shem, all related, all blood relatives. All of them of the pure Hebrew line. So as Satan focused on this group of Abraham's people, Donna, lights and map, please. Second map. All right, I want you to see this. Here's Haran, here's Laban's group. Abraham moved down here. So this is the main focus of God in his bloodline. That Satan would also be focusing on. I want you to see that. If Satan's making women barren and doing all he's doing to stop this pure bloodline, that God had this reserve of the pure Shemites up here. And I added on this. Here's Lot. Let's not forget Lot. You remember him? Another one of this bloodline who, after Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed, you remember he went up in the mountains with his two daughters and they tricked him into having children. And another isolated group on the other side, that's the Dead Sea, the other side of the Dead Sea, of the pure blood. I want you to see that because we're going to, later on, we're going to run into this woman who's in the path of Jesus, whose name is Ruth. She's a Moabitess, one of the daughters of Lot produced with him someone of the pure bloodline that was named Moab. So God's got these pockets of the pure bloodline. I want you to know that. I want you to see that. Okay, you can come back to the lights now. I'm gonna wear that switch out today. I imagine I get smacked on the way home too. So Genesis 29:24 says, and Laban gave unto his daughter Leah Zilpah, his maid, for a handmaid. And in Genesis 29:29, and Laban gave to Rachel his daughter Bilhah, his handmaid. First one maid, second one handmaid, to be her maid. See that? That one switched from handmaid to maid. I might have turned those terms around. Anyway, in Genesis chapter 30, we get to verse 22 and 20 through 24, and there we find that Rachel, who had been barren, was finally given the miracle of conception by God, and her son was named Joseph. And we can read at the time of the birth of Joseph, Jacob's contract with Laban was satisfied. He'd worked there now for 14 years, 7 years for each of his wives, Leah and Rachel. And we get to verse 25, and it says, it came to pass when Rachel had borne Joseph that Jacob said to Laban, send me away that I may go unto my own place and to my country. Give me my wives and my children for whom I've served thee, and let me go, for thou knowest my service which I've done thee. So Jacob had served his 14 years for these two wives, and he figured his contract was fulfilled. It's time to go home. Well, Laban realized something. Laban realized that his own wealth had grown because God was blessing this Jacob. So he proposed another arrangement to keep him working. And the result was that Jacob agreed to work another 6 years, and his wage during this other 6 years would be that any sheep in the flock that were not purely white or solid colored would be his, and the others would be Laban's. Well, Jacob agreed to that, and Laban, then he goes out and he separates out all the colored sheep, so that they wouldn't be breeding with the flock. It was a dirty move. Genesis 30:37 says, and Jacob took him rods of green poplar and of the hazel and chestnut tree, and peeled white streaks in them, and made the white appear which was in the rods. And he set the rods which he had peeled before his flocks in the gutters, in the watering troughs, when the flocks came to drink, that they should conceive when they came to drink. And the flocks conceived before the rods, and brought forth cattle ring-streaked and speckled and spotted. And there's a whole lot of goofy stuff in the commentaries that say, I read that sheep are easily impressionable, and by being bred looking at these striped sticks, I read this in a commentary. So as I think that forward, I think there should be a lot of red barn-colored sheep today. It's just goofiness, because if you go to chapter 31, you'll see why these sheep were born this way. It says God did it. You know, what Jacob was doing here with these sticks, I don't know if it was superstition, or if God had told him to do this with the sticks to bolster his faith. You know, maybe it's like us using anointing oil. The oil does nothing. It bolsters our faith. But you get to the next chapter, and it says God caused these sheep to be born in the way that they would go to to Jacob. So by the time the additional 6 years had passed, most of the flock God had arranged, not the sticks, God had arranged that they would be born collared, so they would go to Jacob's flock. Genesis 30:43 says, and the man increased exceedingly, and he had much cattle. Remember, the term cattle is different than our term. We read cattle, we think cows. Cattle in the Old Testament is flocks of sheep, herds of goats. He had much cattle and maidservants and menservants and camels and asses. So chapter 30 closes. Boy, that was a quick view of chapter 30, wasn't it? Chapter 30 closes after Jacob been 20 years with Laban, he's now got 11 sons and a daughter and 2 wives and a couple concubines and great flocks, great herds of cattle. In Genesis chapter 31, it's about the ending of the relationship between Jacob and Laban after 20 years. After 20 years, we can read that God finally spoke to Jacob and told him it's time to go home. Jacob had been getting richer and richer in his time. And it's because of the agreements that Laban made with him, and God superseded. You see, men can make agreements, God owns the results. And remember, Jacob had been sent to Haran on a pretext, really, to save his hide for a couple of days, and hopefully while you're there, bring home a wife. It's been 20 years. 20 years later, he's going to leave finally with a big household and huge riches and these herds. He had prospered, really, because of the covenant that God made with Abram. He prospered by nothing of his own doing. See, God keeps covenants. He made his covenant with Abraham, which had now passed through Isaac and rest on Jacob. In 31:17 it says, then Jacob rose up and set his sons and his wives upon camels and carried away all his cattle and his goods which he had gotten, the cattle of his getting which he had gotten in Paddan-aram, to go to Isaac his father in the land of Canaan. So after 20 years, Jacob's finally going to head home. In verse 19 it says, and Laban went to shear his sheep. So Laban's going to leave the household. He's going to go out into the field somewhere to shear sheep. And Rachel had stolen the images that were her father's, and Jacob stole away unaware to Laban the Syrian. The Syrian, boy, that's the first time I think we see that. And we know where Syria is. Right there is Assyria on the map. So we see something right here in what Rachel did. If you remember, when we were clear back there with Terah, I told you that Terah was pagan. The Bible tells you that Terah was pagan. That they were up in that area. Terah's family, they're still a pagan people, that Rachel stole her father's idols. They're of a pure bloodline. That's different. You know, we can think, man, they're a pure genetic bloodline. They must be awesome, God-worshiping people. No, they're pagans. It's interesting, the word used there in verse 19 for images, that Rachel stole her father's images, is in the Hebrew is teraphim, which means household gods. Rachel stole her father's idols, or his household gods. You know, it's we read in the start of Genesis that reproduction is after kinds, and we think of, you know, different kinds of animals, but it's also in the human nature that we reproduce after our kind, and sometimes that's really unfortunate. As we looked at the story of Jacob, that Isaac and Rebekah had showed favoritism to their 2 boys, and that was passed on. They reproduced after their kind, and we saw Jacob showing favoritism amongst his 2 wives and the hurt that brought. We see this also in Laban. Laban had reproduced after his kind. Laban, we know, was a greedy man, and he reproduced a family of greed. According to the Westminster Dictionary of the Bible, early law related the possession of the teraphim with ownership of the household property. It was like the title deed of all the man owned was in these idols, in their view. So when Rachel stole her father's idol, she stole the right to her father's property for her husband, even though God had already given him most of it. Big deal. Then remember, Laban had gone to shear his sheep, and while he's gone, see, Jacob's hurrying up to pack his family and gather his flocks, and let's get out of Dodge while Laban's not looking. And no one noticed that Rachel stole her father's idols. Now think about this. If God told Jacob it's time to go home, do you think Jacob had to flee when Laban wasn't looking? I don't think he had to. I think if Jacob wanted to walk out in the middle of the day under Laban's nose, it probably would have been okay. I think God would have seen to it because God's word is sure, His covenant is true. I read this and I think sometimes maybe Jacob was just a little bit too much like you are. Maybe like you have, maybe Jacob had a combination of faith in God and a fear of circumstances. That's how I am sometimes. I look at the circumstances, and again, as Jeannie talked about during worship, the circumstances let this gap get between me and God. And I see the circumstances maybe more than I see God, and that's never a good place to be. Genesis 31:21 says, so he fled with all that he had, and he rose up and passed over the river and set his face toward the Mount Gilead. Well, it was a week before Laban would find out and be able to catch up with him, and as they're closing in on Jacob, Laban and his man, I'm sure that they're probably set on killing Jacob and regaining the daughters and the riches and the idols. But God interceded. There in verse 24 it says, then God came to Laban the Syrian in a dream by night, and he said to him, so Laban's on his way, and he's sleeping in the night, and God says to him in a dream, take heed that thou speak not to Jacob either good or bad. And then Laban overtook Jacob. That seems odd. Don't say anything good or bad. Why would God say that? Well, God prohibited Laban from attacking Jacob, and he prohibited him from sweet-talking Jacob into another deal. If God said, do not attack him to get your stuff back and stop there, Laban, we know he's a deceiver. He was caught up with Jacob, and he would say, I got another sweetheart of a deal for you. Why don't you come back for me and work for another so-and-so years, and I'll sweeten the pot. This time, this will be the deal. And Jacob might well have went back, see. But God even prevented that. So Laban's kind of shoehorned in a little bit. He can't attack, he can't sweet talk. So what's he do? He catches up to Jacob, and he says, I can't believe that you've disrespected me in every way. I can't believe that you snuck away while my back was turned, taking with you my daughters and my grandkids, my property, without giving me the opportunity to give you a proper send-off. Man, I had to throw the party. We read that in verse 29. It says, it's in the power of my hand to do you hurt. But God your father spake to me yesterday night, saying, take thou heed that thou speak not to Jacob either good or bad. And now, though thou wouldest needs be gone, because thou sore longest after thy father's house. Now we get to the heart of the matter. See, he's not really worried about his daughters and his grandchildren. Why have you stolen my idols? It's about the right to the property. He's a greedy man. Why have you disrespected me and stole my idols? Now understand at this point a couple of things. That Jacob didn't know that Rachel had stolen the idols. And understand that Laban had, up to this point, went back on his every word. You know, remember he offered Rachel, but given Leah, after the 14 years were served, and this additional 6 years when the agreement was for sheep. Every time the sheep started being born to Jacob's flock, Laban changed the rules. So God would change the outcome. So he wasn't a man of his word. So Jacob said at verse 31, I left without telling you because I was afraid you'd go back on your word yet again. And by the way, I'm not a thief. If you can find your idols here, then whosoever has them, you have my permission to kill that person. I left without telling you because I was afraid. Stop right there. Because I was afraid. You know, those are three of the most tragic words that I think can ever be spoken. I was afraid. We all have fears, but if we let those fears dictate our actions, they prevent us from accomplishing anything for God. If we let fear stop us, we'll accomplish nothing that God wants us to. You think about life. Most of life's failures stem from our fears, our unwillingness to act in defiance of our fears. You think about most of the great people of history, they're people who acted although they were scared. They acted out in defiance of their fears. So in verse 33, it says, and Laban went into Jacob's tent and into Leah's tent and into the two maidservants' tents, but he found them not. Then he went out of Leah's tent and entered into Rachel's tent. Now Rachel had taken the images and put them in the cattle's furniture or the saddle and sat upon them. And Laban searched all the tents but found them not. And she said to her father, let not displease my lord that I cannot rise up before thee, for the custom of women is upon me. And he searched but found not the images. In other words, Rachel said to her father, please don't make me get up. I'm having my menstruation cycle. Well, when Laban was unable to find the idols, Jacob launches this verbal attack on him, saying, what have I done to deserve this to you? You've searched through all of our stuff. Now lay what you found on the ground right here that belongs to you for everyone to see. Let my people see it. Let your people see it. Then we can judge who's guilty. He goes on. He says, I've worked for you for 20 years. Your sheep and goats, I've not only produced them for you, but when there's a loss, I took the loss of my own. And why the production of them all went my way, I don't know. I didn't eat the rams, he says. I tended your flocks in the heat of the day and the cold of the winter. I spent sleepless nights working for you. I worked for you for 14 years to pay the dowry for your 2 daughters. I worked for 6 more years to earn these sheep, these cattle. And during that time, you changed the agreement 10 times in 6 years. Verse 42, except the God of my father, the God of Abraham and the fear of Isaac had been with me, you'd have sent me away empty. God has seen my affliction and the labor of my hands and rebuked thee yesternight. At this point, Laban was defeated. And he answered in verse 43 and said unto Jacob, these daughters are my daughters, these children are my children, these cattle are my cattle, and all that you see is mine. And what can I do this day unto these daughters or these children which they have borne? Now therefore come thou, let's make a covenant, I and thou, and let be for a witness between me and thee. So Laban and Jacob had arrived at this angry stalemate. So we can read that they set up a pillar of stones to mark the border between the two groups. And the agreement was that if either one crossed the border in the future, the other one was free to kill him. This is an agreement. We'll never see each other again. Let's just agree that we're not going to be friendly. You don't come my way, I don't go your way. If either of us forgets that, it's going to be deadly. It's the separation of the two. Verse 54, and Jim, I'm finishing up. It says, then Jacob offered a sacrifice upon the mountain. He called his brethren to eat bread, and they did eat bread and tarried all night in the mount. And early in the morning, Laban rose up and kissed his sons and his daughters and blessed them. They don't have a word for grandsons and granddaughters, so these are them. And Laban departed and returned unto his place. And next week, as we get into chapter 32, we'll find that old Jacob boy this pillar he just set up is a hard border behind him that he's going to be between a rock and a hard place. He won't be able to go backwards, and his brother Esau, who wants to kill him, is ahead of him. And so we'll see how that works out. Jim, you want to come and worship? So let's stand and let's worship. You know, that sermon felt just a little bit clunky to me, going back and forth. In my mind, putting it together, it seemed really smooth. But I hope I got my point across, and I hope this week be a good use of your time if you would go to Genesis chapter 11 and read about the Tower of Babel and see that it goes directly to these are the descendants of Shem. And read now this story, this time, keeping the whole context, because throughout the church history, men and women have read it and they thought, well, these are two disconnected points. You know, the chapter opens telling us about the Tower of Babel and this disobedience, and then here's another one of these boring genealogies that mean nothing to me. It means everything to the chapter. So I want you to see, I want you to keep seeing the importance of this pure bloodline. I want you to see that God, again, wasn't, as I said, wasn't threatened by the Tower of Babel, but you and I were. That our salvation depended on these people scattering as God first told them to go, just to disperse, not to come together. So as we close the day, I hope, as Jim said, I hope I managed to get my point across. I hope it's blessed you. I hope God would continue to bless you. I hope God would show you a great abundance of mercy and truth as you go through the week. I hope God puts someone in your path that you can witness to. The world is so quickly darkening. And you're bearers of light. You know, coming to church isn't about entertainment, it's about responsibility. This relationship with Jesus Christ is about responsibility. That you know the things that can change someone's eternal destination. It's not for you to keep. Go in peace, go with God, and go be a blessing. Thank you.